So why are we attracted to who we are? Is it just, feelings,
Yeah.
chemistry, or are there these older, um, maybe evolutionary forces pulling the strings?
It's such a fundamental question, isn't it?
Mm.
And really key for psychology. To understand why we act the way we do, sometimes you absolutely have to look back at our evolutionary history.
Exactly. And that's what we're doing today, a real deep dive into sexual selection and human reproductive behavior. We've got a bunch of sources here, research papers, explanations. We're going to try and unpack it.
Yeah, and our goal here, especially thinking about you psychology students listening, is to really draw that line from these big evolutionary ideas like sexual selection to the actual mating preferences and strategies we observe in people.
See how the biology might provide a kind of framework for the psychology.
Exactly. We want to show how these sort of biological roots underpin some of the psychological stuff you're learning about. It's like getting the backstory.
A backdrop for relationships, attraction, all that. So what's the plan?
Okay, so we'll define sexual selection first, how it's different from just natural selection. Then we'll hit the biological foundation, anisogamy.
Right.
Then the two main types, mate choice and mate competition. And then, importantly, we'll look at some key psychology studies that actually tested these ideas on humans.
Perfect. Let's dive in. Okay, natural selection, we know that one. Survival of the fittest, adapting, surviving.
Right.
How does sexual selection fit in, or how is it different?
Right, so sexual selection is really a part of natural selection, or maybe a special kind of it. It's not just about staying alive. It's
Right.
about staying alive long enough to, well, reproduce successfully.
Ah, okay.
It's specifically focused on traits that give you an edge in mating, either being chosen by mates or winning out against rivals for mates.
So surviving winter is natural selection, but having the traits that get you a partner come springtime,
Yeah.
that's sexual selection.
You got it. Over generations, individuals who are better at the mating game, maybe they're more attractive, maybe they're better fighters, they have more kids, and those successful mating traits get passed on, becoming more common. Even if sometimes those traits aren't great for just plain survival.
Like the classic peacock's tail. Makes him look amazing to peons, but also maybe a big, flashy target for predators.
Exactly, it's a trade-off. Sexual selection can favor traits that might even be a disadvantage for pure survival if they significantly boost reproductive success. It's a really powerful evolutionary engine.
Okay, so it's about reproduction. You mentioned a core biological driver behind the different ways males and females oft approach this. Anisogamy.
Anisogamy.
Yeah.
Yeah, sounds technical, but it's actually incredibly simple at its core. It's just a difference in the sex cells, the gametes.
Sperm and eggs.
Exactly. Male gametes, sperm, are tiny. They're mobile. And they're produced in absolutely vast numbers, pretty much throughout adult life.
Okay.
Female gametes, eggs, or ova are the opposite. They're large, they're static, they don't move on their own, and crucially, they're produced in very limited numbers only during the fertile years.
And just this size and number difference, it has massive knock-on effects for behavior and strategy.
Huge effects. First, it creates an imbalance. Potentially many, many more sperm available than eggs at any given time. So you've got more males ready to potentially father offspring than females ready to conceive.
Which naturally leads to males competing for access to those limited eggs.
That's part of it, yes.
Yeah.
But the even bigger consequence is the difference in biological investment.
Ah, right. Because the female doesn't just provide the larger, more energy-expensive egg.
She also typically carries the pregnancy, gives birth, often does most of the early nurturing. Her minimum obligatory investment in each offspring is just vastly higher from the get-go.
That idea of asymmetry in parental investment, Travers talked about that, right?
Yes, exactly. Travers highlighted how this difference in investment is key because females invest so much more per offspring, evolutionarily speaking. They have more to lose from a poor mating choice.
Which pushes them towards a different strategy.
It does. It suggests different optimal strategies evolutionarily. For males, with their low-cost sperm, a quantity strategy might pay off mate with multiple partners to maximize the chances of passing on genes.
Spread the genetic material widely.
Right. Whereas for females, with their high investment eggs in pregnancy, a quality strategy is often more beneficial. Be very selective. Choose a mate who offers good genes or resources or protection things that increase the survival chances of her limited precious offspring.
Okay, so anisogamy leads to different investment levels, which leads to these different potential strategies. Quality versus quantity. This feels like a major link between the biology and the psychology we see.
It absolutely is. It sets the stage for the two main types of sexual selection we see playing out.
Let's get into those. First type, Intersexual selection.
Intersexual selection. Think inter meaning between the sexes. This is mate choice. It's where one sex, usually the females, because of that higher investment, chooses their mates from the other sex based on certain desirable traits.
So the females are doing the selecting. They're looking for specific things.
Exactly. They're assessing potential mates for signals. Signals of genetic quality, maybe health, maybe the ability to provide resources or parental care, status. Things that will ultimately benefit her and her offspring's survival and success.
Makes sense. They have more writing on the decision.
Precisely. Their reproductive output is limited, so making a good choice is paramount.
Okay, and the sources mentioned something interesting here, the sexy sons hypothesis, Fisher's idea.
Ah, yes. That's a fascinating layer. The idea is that females might choose males who are attractive, not just because attractiveness signals good genes or resources directly.
But because those attractive traits will be passed on to her sons.
Exactly. If her sons inherit dad's attractive features, they'll be more successful at attracting mates themselves in the next generation.
So she gets an indirect reproductive benefit through her son's success.
Wow. It shows that mate choice can be complex. It's not always about immediate survival benefits, but also about maximizing gene transmission down the line.
Okay, so that's intersexual selection mate choice, usually by females. What's the flip side?
The flip side is intrasexual selection. Think intra, meaning within the same sex. This is mate competition.
So individuals of one sex competing amongst themselves for access to the other sex.
Right. And typically, again linked back to anisogamy and potential reproductive rates, this often means males competing with other males for mating opportunities with females.
And this type of selection would favor traits that help in that competition, like physical strength.
Exactly. Size, strength, aggression, dominance, displays, whatever helps an individual win contests against rivals. In humans, maybe this translates more subtly sometimes to competing for status, resources, things that make you a more dominant or desirable competitor in the eyes of potential mates or rivals.
And the winner gets the prize mating access and passes on those winning traits.
Precisely. And this intense male-male competition over long evolutionary timescales is thought to be a major driving force behind sexual dimorphism.
The physical differences between males and females, like average size, muscle mass.
Exactly. If males are constantly competing physically, there's evolutionary pressure favoring larger, stronger males. Females, who typically aren't competing in the same way or for the same stakes, don't face the same pressure for size and strength. So the sexes diverge physically.
So those differences we see could be partly an echo of ancient competitive dynamics.
That's the evolutionary argument, yes. And you also see related behaviors selected for. Things like mate guarding, where males try to prevent rivals from accessing their partner, or direct aggression towards competitors.
Okay, got it. So let's recap the theory quickly. We start with anisogamy, different gametes. That leads to different parental investment levels.
Right, usually higher for females.
Which drives different optimal strategies, quality focus for females, potential quantity focus for males. And these strategies play out through intersexual selection, mate choice, often female choice.
And intersexual selection mate competition, often male competition.
Leading to things like sexual dimorphism and specific behavioral patterns. Okay, that's the framework. But how do psychologists actually test if this stuff applies to modern humans?
Great question. Because it's one thing to have the theory, another to see if it holds up in real human behavior. This is where the empirical studies are crucial, especially for psychology students trying to bridge that gap.
And one of the biggest ones mentioned is Buss's study from 1989. That was huge, wasn't it?
Absolutely massive. Over 10,000 people, 33 countries across 6 continents. I mean, if you're looking for universal human patterns, that's the kind of scale you need.
And what was he looking for? What people value in a partner?
Essentially, yes. He asked people to rate the importance of various characteristics in a potential long-term mate. And the results were, well, pretty striking in how closely they matched the evolutionary predictions.
Okay, so what did they find? Were there clear differences between what men and women wanted?
Very clear and remarkably consistent across cultures. Females, significantly more than males, valued things like good financial prospects, ambition, industriousness, basically indicators of resource acquisition ability.
Which lines up perfectly with the quality strategy seeking a mate who can invest resources in offspring.
Exactly. And males, they consistently rated physical attractiveness and youth as much more important than females did.
Cues related to fertility and reproductive value, as the theory would predict for a quantity or fertility-focused strategy.
Precisely. In some cultures, Males also valued chastity more, which from an evolutionary perspective could relate to paternity uncertainty, wanting to ensure the offspring are actually theirs. The fact these patterns held up across so many diverse societies was powerful evidence against them being purely cultural whims.
It strongly suggests these preferences might have deeper, evolved roots. Okay, so Buss supports the idea of different preferences. What about the different strategies, the idea that males might be less selective, especially for short-term mating?
Right, this brings us to another classic, though maybe more debated study, Clark and Hatfield, also from '89.
The campus study, where they approach students with different propositions.
That's the one. Male and female researchers approached students of the opposite sex and asked one of three questions. Something like, would you go on a date tonight? Would you come back to my apartment? Or, the most direct one, would you have sex with me tonight?
And the results for that last question were pretty stark, weren't they?
Very stark. For the date, roughly half of both men and women said yes. For going back to the apartment, more men agreed than women, but still, some women did. But for the direct sexual proposition,
Yeah.
about 75% of the men said yes, and the women, 0%, none.
Wow. Okay, even if you factor in safety concerns or social norms, that 0 versus 75% difference is hard to ignore.
It is. It's often cited as strong support for the evolutionary hypothesis that males, due to lower minimum investment, are psychologically adapted to be more receptive to casual sex opportunities, that quantity strategy playing out. Females, facing potentially massive costs from a casual encounter, pregnancy, are predicted to be far more selective.
So we have evidence for preferences, Buss, and maybe different thresholds for sexual activity, Clark and Hatfield. What about specific physical cues? You mentioned anosogamy predicts males look for fertility signals.
Yes, and this links to research like Devendra Singh's work on waist-hip ratio.
Right, the idea that a certain ratio around zero point 0.7 is consistently found attractive by men across different cultures.
Exactly. Singh argued this specific ratio, a narrower waist compared to hips, is attractive regardless of overall body weight because it's an honest signal of youth, health, and importantly, reproductive capability. It's hormonally influenced and changes with things like pregnancy and menopause.
So a seemingly simple aesthetic preference might actually be a deeply ingrained, evolved mechanism for detecting fertility.
That's the interpretation from the evolutionary psychology perspective. It fits the pattern of males seeking reliable cues of reproductive value in potential mates.
Okay, and these patterns don't just show up in surveys or experiments, right? The sources mention studies looking at real-world behavior.
Absolutely. Like the Wainforth and Dunbar study from 1995, they did something clever. They analyzed Lonely Hearts ads, personal ads in newspapers.
To see what people actually advertise about themselves when looking for a mate?
Exactly.
Yeah.
What attributes do they highlight to attract someone? And what do they say they're looking for?
And did it match the theories?
It really did. Men writing the ads were significantly more likely to talk about their resources, their job, their financial status, their stability, basically advertising their ability to provide.
Offering what the quality-seeking female strategy is predicted to look for.
Precisely. And women placing ads. They were far more likely to mention their physical attractiveness, their youth, their looks.
Highlighting cues related to fertility and reproductive value, which the male strategy is predicted to prioritize.
It's quite compelling because it's people's own words, their own attempts to attract a partner, and they seem to be intuitively following these evolutionary scripts. Men offering resources, women offering fertility cues.
That's fascinating. It's like seeing the theory play out organically. So taking these studies together, Buss, Clark and Hatfield, Singh, Wainforth and Dunbar, they build a pretty strong case from a psychological standpoint that these evolutionary forces have left a real imprint on our mating psychology.
They provide a solid body of evidence suggesting that, yes, our preferences and strategies aren't arbitrary. They seem shaped by these deeper evolutionary pressures linked to reproduction. It gives psychology students a really powerful historical context.
Definitely. But it's crucial to remember, as always with human behavior, it's not just biology, right? We're not puppets on evolutionary strings.
Absolutely not. That's a critical point. Culture, society, learning, individual choices, they all interact with any biological predispositions. The sources highlight this complexity too.
Like the Beretsky study, suggesting that as women's economic power changes, their preferences might shift.
Exactly. Beretsky and colleagues proposed that if women become more financially independent, their evolutionary need to prioritize resource holding in a mate might lessen, potentially changing their mate preferences. The environmental context changes, so the expression of the strategy might change too.
That makes total sense. The underlying problem changes, so the solution adapts.
And there was also that study by Chang and colleagues in China looking at mate preferences over 25 years.
What did they find?
A mix, really. Some preferences seemed quite stable over that period, suggesting maybe a stronger biological underpinning, but others had changed significantly, likely reflecting the huge cultural and economic shifts happening in China.
So it's a dynamic interplay. Nature provides the foundation, maybe some tendencies, but nurture, culture, the current environment, they shape how it all plays out.
Beautifully put. It's that constant interaction that makes studying human psychology so fascinating and challenging. Evolutionary theory gives us a powerful lens on the why, the ultimate causes, but culture and individual experience shape the how, the proximate expression.
Okay, let's try and pull this all together then. Thinking about what this deep dive means, especially for understanding psychology.
Right. So we've established sexual selection as this key evolutionary process, driven by the basic biology of anisogamy, the sperm and egg difference,
Which leads to different levels of parental investment between the sexes.
creating pressure for potentially different mating strategies. Quality focus for females, perhaps more quantity focus for males, evolutionarily speaking.
These strategies then manifest through intersexual selection, mate choice, and intersexual selection, mate competition.
And result in observable things like sexual dimorphism and, importantly for psychology, specific patterns of preferences and behaviors.
And we've seen that psychological research, using various methods from surveys to experiments to real-world observations, provides evidence that these patterns predicted by evolutionary theory do seem to exist in humans.
Yes, while always remembering that crucial layer of cultural influence and individual variation that shapes the final behavior we see.
So for someone studying psychology, understanding sexual selection isn't just abstract biology. It provides this foundational context for so many areas: attraction, relationships, maybe even conflict, social dynamics.
Absolutely. It helps explain why certain patterns might exist, why certain things feel important in relationships, why we might see certain conflicts arise. It connects the immediate psychological mechanisms you study: attraction, jealousy, parental care, to their potential deeper historical origins.
It adds that ultimate explanation layer to the proximate psychological one. Why do we find symmetrical faces attractive? Maybe because symmetry was an honest signal of health in our ancestors. Why the emphasis on status may be linked to resource competition.
Exactly. It offers potentially powerful explanations rooted in the fundamental drive to reproduce, which has shaped us for millions of years.
It definitely gives you a different perspective on human motivation, sometimes the unconscious parts. Which leads to a final thought, I guess.
Yeah, something to mull over. Given this deep evolutionary history, how much are these ancient strategies, these preferences for certain cues, these competitive urges, these different approaches to mating, still quietly shaping our choices and feelings today, even when we think we're being completely rational or modern?
Are we reacting to echoes of the past without even realizing it? And where else might these reproductive pressures show up? Not just romance, but maybe, I don't know, how we compete in the workplace, how we respond to advertising, our social hierarchies.
It's a fascinating question. How far do the ripples of sexual selection extend into the broader landscape of human psychology? Definitely food for thought.
Indeed. Something to keep pondering as you delve deeper into the human mind.